highly data literate, and I don't know if I'm there. I'm working on it. I think there's so much to learn. I think you can maybe relate to that feeling. But the genesis of this presentation, as well as an ebook, which I hope to get to you all, is that I sat there about a year ago, right about now. I had made up my mind to leave a fabulous company with a fabulous product and amazing customers, because I really felt there was this education gap that I wanted to help address out there. And it went beyond any one tool. And that is that there are so many people. I think you can probably think of many individuals in your own family and friend circles, and certainly those who we work with at work, who feel like they're being left behind. Like there's this data movement happening, they're not really sure what's going on, and they feel like they have a long way to go to get to the place where they're a regular and meaningful contributor in a data dialogue. And so I just said, well, what does it even mean to be data literate? What is the meaning of that term? And so I sat there and I thought, well, I've been at some pretty cool companies, and I just thought to myself, what do the people that I've had the benefit and the privilege of working with over the last few years, thanks, that I consider highly data literate, what are they like? And so that was where I started. Well, the definition of data literacy is the ability to do four things: read, understand, create, and communicate data as information. And my observation was just that this is basically like, think of it like, remember in the 80s when we were little kids, they had word processing classes maybe in the 80s, and then in the 90s, we started to learn about, you could go learn how to use Netscape Navigator, right? And then maybe another decade later, they were able to learn about social media, and I can get trained on Twitter, and I still have no idea how to use Twitter. But now, that's sort of the big gap now, is everybody's saying, in order for me to be able to get past this, maybe this hurdle in my own career, I need to get better at speaking data. And so it's such a common thing and requirement nowadays. But I said, well, oftentimes I think we make the mistake of just thinking, what tools do I know? Am I really good at this tool or that programming language? And so I think that that's probably a starting point, and it's a good one because it is important to know how to use all those tools. But as you all know, that ecosystem is evolving very rapidly. And so, what may be important today, if you imagine in 5 years, think of the tools you use today that you never even heard of, that didn't even exist 5 years ago. So it's constantly evolving and changing. And so it occurred to me that maybe if we define data literacy along 4 different kind of categorical vectors. One is knowledge. What do you know? What are the things, concepts, that you are aware of and kind of have mastery over? And then skills, what are those things you're able to do? But then these are the last 2, I think, that get left out a lot. What are the attitudes someone who's highly data literate needs to possess and display in an organization to be effective? And then the critical one, at the end of the day, behaviors, when the rubber hits the road. What do they do day in and day out? How do they act? And what are those things you can depend on a highly data literate person to be behaving and doing? So that's kind of where I started from. I sent it out to a group of people I feel really lucky to be associated with as advisors of this startup that I'm on here. And people like Alberto Cairo and George Lupi gave it a once over, provided some quotes that you'll get when you see the ebook later on, which is coming your way. But it starts with knowledge. What do we know? So what are the things? And so the 17 key traits that and I don't think they're the only 17 key traits. I don't think that, you may take out one, you may add one, and that's great. I don't claim to be any kind of definitive final say in what it means to be highly data literate, and I think it's different from place to place. But these 17 I felt are pretty common across the board. So one is just that we have this awareness of the basic building blocks of data. I mean, it's hard to be a poet if you don't know about letters and consonants and verbs and nouns, right? Those are like your building blocks. Those are your core elements that you use to put together to create what you create. And I think the same is true of those of us who work with data. So being able to tell, for example, what's the difference between empirical data versus abstract data, one that's measured from our environment versus one that is created by formulas and mathematical models. And then my favorite, the third kind of data, which is metadata, also known as a love note to the future, where we're talking about data about data. So what are the key characteristics of a particular data set that we may be working with, things that I felt data.world as a catalog does a great job of bringing to the forefront so that everybody's aware. But then we can talk about, well, are you familiar with scale types, like nominal versus ordinal, right, versus interval or ratio? Are those familiar to you? I worked with data for many years before I really had a good grasp of those. Basic kind of that framework of how do you measure things around you, right? Nominal just being names of things. Ordinal being rankings, or think about that in terms of like a wine rating on a scale of 0 to 5, where the difference between a 0 and a 1 might be different than the distance between a 3 and a 4 or a 4 and a 5. And then intervals is kind of the funky one. It's where the 0 point doesn't have a very strong meaning, like oftentimes if we talk about the temperature, right? 0 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't mean no heat or no temperature. But in ratio quantitative data types, scale types, 0 does mean nothing. Like you think of the weight of the bottle. 0 would be like nothing, there's nothing there. So that's the difference between those two, categorical in light blue and then quantitative in dark blue. And it really matters, that we know these things. We know how to use them. It's like, why? You'd say, like, well, why does that even matter? Well, it's going to affect the kinds of visualizations we create, the kind of analysis we do. It may help us avoid something I would say this came up just this last week. I love this one, where we're graphing Windows and there's 2000, because it's a nominal variable, right? And someone's using it as a quantitative, so you gotta love that. But this leads us down this interesting road of maybe perhaps kind of analyzing the data that we have at our disposal in an appropriate way, even though it might be funny. But being able to kind of speak that language. What are these different variable types and how do they help us make sense of the world we live in? So the people we work with around us, do they understand those things? Can we help them understand those things? That's the mission I'm on now. This is the realm of that data engineer. I love this person. I have so much to learn here, but where data gets stored, how it gets stored, the form and the structure that it takes when it gets stored, how often it's refreshed. These are things we have entire disciplines and massive teams in even medium-sized companies that are focused on addressing. And I would say even people that are analysts, you'd say, well, they don't need to know any of that. Why do they need to know where the data was housed and any of that? I think it is important for them to have a basic understanding of these kinds of things. It does affect their analysis and the way they can work with that data. So, whether this is something you're an expert in or just becoming cursory aware of, I would say, yeah, someone who is highly data literate does kind of grasp this very important aspect of where do we put data. And this is the biggest one of all, because data analysis, you say, well, what is that? That's such a massive category, clearly. But people who are data literate really understand that you're not just gathering and storing data as an end in itself. I think we stopped doing that maybe 10 years ago, 5 years ago, where now it's like, well, let's make use of it. Let's actually get some value out of data and have that affect what we do and the decisions we make. So being able to analyze data and the kind of analysis that's important in your environment. That might change as you go from one company to the next, even within one company, one job to the next. So being able to know those fundamental principles. And I'll give a simple example. A lot of times, there's many, many misconceptions about even the simplest statistical parameters. Let's say, for example, average. So when we talk to people about average, I would say most times they hear the idea or the word typical. That's sort of what they interpret us to be telling them. If I say to you, for example, did you know that the average NFL player is about 25 years old, okay? Just over 6 foot 2 inches in height, weighs a little more than 244 pounds, and makes about $1.5 million in salary. So if I just said that to your average person out on the street, they would have an idea that that sentence means those are pretty typical parameters for someone who plays in the NFL. But then if I show you on the left-hand side those 4 distributions, those map to those 4 variables, by the way, okay? Age, height, weight, salary. Age, height, weight, salary. So if I asked you to match which of those 4 on the left, A, B, C, or D, which of them is age? Which of them do you think is age? So yes, the average player is 25 years old, but what's the average age? What's the distribution of age amongst all the players? Any guesses? B. Whoever said B is right. This is sort of a survival function where you have some players, playing it well into their late 30s and 40s and typically winning Super Bowls and playing with deflated footballs. But in any case, those are players that play well beyond, even older than me, okay? But it's very unlikely to have an extremely young player due to the rules. Okay, how about height? Which of those, it's process of elimination, there's 1 out of 3. Which of those 3 is height? A is height, so it's actually very Gaussian. If you lump all the players together, it's a very close to normal distribution for height. Okay, 2 to go here. What about weight? Which is C or D weight? C is weight. It's like a trimodal, right? You've got different positions. You've got your really, let's see if this thing's gonna work for me. You have your really, does that work? No. You have your really fast and speedy players, like your wide receivers, and they're right here. Right, you've got this larger, kind of heavier group that's playing on the line, typically line of scrimmage, and you got this group in the middle that are running backs and linebackers and things like that. But it's interesting, the trimodal. And then obviously that means the last one there, D, is salary. So what this means then, if you said to your average player, what if I went, instead of telling someone on the street, what if I told an average player, oh, is this about your situation? The thing that they'd probably object to the most strenuously would be what? Salary. They'd say, I don't make anywhere near $1.5 million. Like, give me a break. So, and then there might be some that, again, they're in the 20s, 20 million plus. So there are these you can't even hardly see them on the histogram there. They're so small. There's 1 or 2 out there to the far right. But the point is, this is when we're working with people and talking to people about data, day in and day out. These are the sorts of things we have to keep in mind and really take the time to explain and clarify. You guys got it. You guys are perfect. Height, age, weight, salary. I've never seen a group get it so close to right. Data visualization rules of thumb. So I love this book, Visualization Analysis and Design, by a friend of mine, Tamara Munzner, who's I would say probably the best data visualization researcher. She's out of Vancouver, University of British Columbia. She wrote this textbook that I teach in my University of Washington class. And I tell my students, if I had one slide to teach them the data visualization theory class, it would be this slide, because it helps them understand the different ways we can encode data as points on a common scale, as length, as tilt, as area, as color. And so then in descending order, the effectiveness, the ability for another person we're communicating with to take that encoding and make a reasonable, accurate guess about the real proportions of the real world. So someone who's highly data literate gets this, and this is in their bones. It doesn't mean they don't use the things at the bottom. Sure, they use it for a secondary or tertiary variable, and sometimes they use it because it's just a very appropriate thing to do for one reason or another. But it's based on a trade-off. They're aware of the trade-off, and when someone shows data that doesn't, they talk about that. Skills, so that's knowledge. Skills are important too. I had RJ Andrews, he lives here in the Bay Area. He came to present one time. I asked him to come to Tableau, and he did an overview for the dev team on a project he had done of US national parks, I think. He calls it a data short. It's like a movie. And he had a slide where he talked about his process and all the tools. So just a highly skilled individual that can do lots of different sorts of things. He has a book that just came out called Info We Trust. I have no commercial reason to tell you that, other than it's a really good book and you want to check it out. But I had him do the quote for the skill section because, again, I feel he's so skilled. But this is critical now. I'm trying to think of an individual that is going to be able to work in a professional context that doesn't have to read data. Because it isn't even just professional, right? We're doing this in our daily lives. We're tracking things on devices. We're trying to understand our own finances. And that involves charts and graphs. You can't really escape that. So being able to understand them, taking a dashboard like this, knowing what to do with it, what questions to ask, being able to take it apart and find those interesting patterns and trends, and be able to communicate that, right? To be able to talk about that, have a dialogue about that. A lot of people think that's it. You just need to be, that's what, I had this one individual on my board. I sent this book to him. I said, can you please review this? And he said, are you sure they need to do anything more than just be able to read charts and graphs? And it was a very kind of strong pushback. And I sat there for a while and really thought about it. Like, is that all it means to be data literate? That I can just read charts and graphs and I get it when someone shows me something? And I came back and I said, I think that I'm going to raise the bar higher than that. I know that that's going to be frustrating for some people. But if I don't, then I'm at the mercy of the person who created it. And maybe they made a mistake, or maybe they intend to mislead or deceive me, heaven forbid. But There's so many opportunities, as you all know, for making mistakes with data, because no data is clean. Anytime we start with data, it's not a question of whether it's dirty or not, it's like how dirty, you know? So we definitely have to think about that. Here's a fun little example. So if I take 61,000 car tows in the city of Baltimore, the Baltimore Department of Transportation publishes this to the web. It's so cool, you can download the CSV. 61,000 times cars got towed in the course of about 5 or 6 years or so, I think. If I take a look at those and I say, well, what were the most common makes that got towed? Okay, cool. Number 1, Honda. Number 2, Ford. Chevy. Toyota. Dodge. Nissan. Toyota. Honda. Wait a minute. Acura, Ford. What? What's going on here? Clearly, there's lots of ways to get the name, make of a car into a database, and it can look very different, right? So I found, looking at these 61,000 records, okay, I saw lots of Fords, clearly. F-O-R-D, I mean, it's a 4-letter. How hard can that be? Well, I'll tell you how hard it is. There's lots of capital Fords. That's not a big deal. Maybe they just had caps lock on. They didn't know it. That's what I do 50% of the time I try to put my password in. But there's also Forf, and there's also Ford, okay? How about a harder one like Peterbilt? There's Peterbilt. There's Peterbilt. There's Peterbutt. And there's Pete. I don't know if that's actually Pete or if it's a Peterbilt, I don't know. There's Mitsubishi and Mitsubishi. And there's burnt car. That's all in 61,000 rows, right? 36 ways of spelling the word Volkswagen, which I think I probably would have gotten wrong before this. So what happens then is I take the before view, and then I move ahead to the after view. Look at that, Volkswagen goes from 26th all the way up to 11. It's almost in the top 10, because there's so many ways to misspell it. So did it matter to my analysis? Well, yeah, it kind of did. I mean, even Toyota and Chevy moved the 3rd to 4th spot, they swapped. So yeah, it had a big effect on the analysis, right? So again, data's dirty, and if someone just showed me the first view, how would I know if they'd done this due diligence? I wouldn't. So we need to be able to get our hands on data and work with it ourselves. Ultimately, it's exploring, right? It's being able to take data, it's being able to understand its bounds, its mins, its maxes, the distributions, being able to break it apart, being able to see what's going on in it. Each data set has intricacies and nuances and quirks and problems, so being able to find those and explore them. And then it isn't just about reading those charts and graphs, right? We need to be able to create these too. I mean, this is important for us to use programming languages or software to create visuals that people understand. I mean, it's just, this is a basic skill now. And then communicating it. So this is the #1 thing. I've only been doing this for a few months now, 4 months, and I've been talking to a lot of people, and I've been trying to ask them, what's your biggest barrier? And this is the one that they say the most often. They say a lot of things, but this is the one I hear the most, which is, I really need to be able to communicate insights to my colleagues and coworkers more effectively. I'm not a good data storyteller. I actually just got in the cab and came up here. I'm actually down in the South Bay area doing an online course on data storytelling. This is a really important topic. Let me give a fun, and there's actually so many amazing ways now to be able to communicate data effectively. Like, let's take the topic of renewable energy, right? If I say to you, okay, how have countries in the world compared, and how have they changed over time in the percent of the energy they consume that's renewable? And I could say to you, well, there's all the data right there. And you can say, I see it, okay. That's a timeline, it shows all that data, that's awesome. No, it's not, it's a spaghetti chart, right? So compare this, what if I just showed this and I told my colleagues, okay, this shows some trends happening in energy consumption? Not really. Okay, but then this is the other way, and this is using, anybody Flourish? Let me show you, it says flourish.studio. Used to create, I think it's basically creating HTML and JavaScript and D3. But here's another way of telling this same story. I think I need to end here. Excuse me 1 second. Hopefully, thanks you for the folks here for getting the audio set up. So here would be another way of telling that same story, okay? Here we go.
Let's compare countries based on wealth with GDP per capita on the x-axis and the percent of the energy they consume that's renewable on the y-axis from 0 to 100%. We'll color them based on their income level, and we can change the x-axis from linear scale to log scale to get a better look at the different levels of wealth. Each bubble starts in 1990, and we can move ahead a quarter of a century in time to 2014. If we focus just on the low-income countries, we see they're high in a renewable energy rate, but while they move to the right and increase in wealth, they tend to drop lower on the chart over this time, indicating a decrease in percent renewable energy. Lower middle income countries vary widely in their renewable energy usage rate, with countries like Nigeria close to 90% renewable and others like Ukraine below 5%. Over the past 25 years, these countries too got wealthier, but most, including India, reduced in renewable energy rate. Upper middle income countries saw major strides in wealth from 1990 to 2014, but many of them, including most notably China, declined significantly in renewable energy percent consumption. When we look at high-income countries, there are a couple of bright spots like Iceland and Sweden, but for the most part, the world's wealthiest nations increased in wealth while dropping in renewable energy consumption percent. If we watch the story play out over time, we see the gradual shift right and down toward the bottom right of high wealth and low renewable consumption. What will it take to turn this trend around? Can we get wealthier nations to also increase their renewable energy consumption rate? Time will tell.
Okay, so that's a whole different kind of data storytelling, isn't it? I mean, it's the same data. I mean, I guess I added GDP in there too. But these kinds of skills are now required and are being asked for. And there's ways that we're looking to develop those skills too. So yeah, some creative ways to start taking data and actually telling data stories that are more effective. This is a fun one. Has anybody ever heard of two-tone? No, it's like data sonification. You've heard of data visualization, right? There's data sonification. So I could say, if I take a look at the change, the delta, okay, every bar is a delta of the rural population of the United States by decade for over half a century, going back over 50 years. I can see that it's really interesting, isn't it? Kind of each decade has its own little signature, and it's fascinating how it seems to fit in little mini 10-year patterns like that, which I found really fascinating. But what two-tone allows you to do is just upload this spreadsheet, again, to it's app.twotone.io, I think. And you can take this thing, okay, and do with it. There we go. So that's data sonification. So is that necessary in every case? No. But is it interesting? Does it add a different storytelling element? Would it help with individuals who are blind or have accessibility issues like that? Yeah, absolutely. And this unlocks a whole new way we can think about exploring data. So this is a new thing. Again, check it out. It's app.twotone.io. I used that just really quickly. It didn't take long at all to make a little, and then I had to match them up. So anyway, really cool little tools now to kind of make more effective storytelling use. We'll go through the last two segments in maybe a little faster pace here, just to in the interest of time. But I'm a big believer in this. So if we talk about communicating with others as it relates to data, I'm a big believer that we should think of it as a team sport, and then pretty much everyone in the organization should be able to have that conversation around the data. That should be a conversation that we pull in as many people as we can to. And there are so many things about interacting with data that just uses the visual cortex skills we had when we were born. We didn't even have to work on them. That if we were to be patient and give people the opportunity to learn, they could then give a whole different perspective to the kinds of things we're analyzing and studying. So inclusiveness, I think, is a key trait. And again, you may agree or disagree, but I definitely believe we should be thinking about working with groups of people and thinking about it from the point of view that it doesn't matter what department they're in, what level they are in the organization. If we have a conversation around data, I should be bringing in others as much as I can. This is almost an output, right? The confidence you have. I want to work with people who are confident to dive into data. It's so easy to be intimidated because there's so many opportunities for error, because it can be so complex. But ultimately, if we have those knowledge and skills, this can be an attitude we can claim too, that we look at ourselves as capable of working with data. And again, that I believe is part of data literacy, is feeling that. While at the same time, this used to say wary, but I have to give credit to my own mom for changing it to alert. I sent it to her and she said, Ben, that's kind of a negative word, wary. I said, that's true. She said, well, what do you think about alert? And I love it. I think that when we talk about being alert, we know that there are little pitfalls we can fall into all around, and we're kind of aware of that. We're on the lookout for it without being, on the negative side of being on the lookout, which again, I think the word wary kind of more captures. But I'm actually working on a book right now called Avoiding Data Pitfalls, and it's not really coming along very fast, but I'll get back to it. I got about 3 chapters left to write, and that's what April's for me. But yeah, there's so many. I mean, you all have fallen into pitfalls as many times. If you work with data for any amount of time at all, you kind of find yourself down there looking up going, how did I end up here again, right? So like, here's a silly example. If I were to show you all the meteorites in the world, and for the last literally 4,500 years, and your conclusion for this is that meteorites are afraid of the water, right? Or the Amazon or parts of North Russia, you'd really kind of be falling into the pitfall that you're not kind of cognizant of the fact that your data, there's a gap between your data and reality. We're just talking about recorded meteorites, not actual meteorites. And that's so common that actually, that little mistake, it sounds silly, I make it all the time. I always think my data is perfect, and I always have to sit there and say, like, wait a second, what are the ways in which this process that created it may have led me astray? So being alert, and that's the book right there. It even has a cover, which is great, except there's not enough pages yet. So my wily editors have been really good to me about that. Okay, we sat here about 1.5 years ago in this exact room, and a group of us said, what does it mean to have data ethics at the forefront of what we're doing? We missed this. I mean, as a big picture, right? The world we live in went full speed ahead working with data and didn't come in and say, wait a minute, what does it mean to be ethical with data? What does it mean to be fair and to eliminate bias and to preserve people's privacies? And so we have seen headline after headline after headline over the last few years of great companies, great products, and just falling into this pitfall of actually making incredibly unethical decisions based on data. And it's a thing that we need to be able to bring up. Highly data literate individuals will say, you know what, there could be a problem with doing this. There could be a problem, and some people could be harmed by it, actually. Let's talk about that, and let's understand it, and let's do what we can to mitigate that before we publish, before we ship. And this is what came out of it. You can see it at data.world, and about 1,700 people, I think, to date have signed it, which is super cool. And as Patrick mentioned at the beginning, this whole website is completely revolutionized now. It's not just a place for you to sign this awesome set of principles. It's actually now a repository of really awesome free training content for you to help the people you work with become more data literate. And it's just hosted on the Linux Foundation. It's completely open source. And so definitely check that out at datapractices.org. But I love this book too. Has anybody ever read it? Ethics and Data Science? Yeah, a couple of us have. It's only, you literally get through it in maybe 20 minutes to half an hour, I think. It's a very short book. It's by DJ Patil, who used to be the chief data officer under Obama's administration, I believe, and Hillary Mason, who's, I think is currently at Cloudera, thank you. And Mike Lukides, who's at O'Reilly, but they take a really practical look at data science and ethics, and don't just kind of do this hand wavy, oh, we should. They really get into the practical side of it, like what does it mean to make these decisions? What are some ways we can maybe fool ourselves that we're doing something that's harmless when it's not? So again, a free read. You can just, and the case studies down there are really neat too that Princeton has put out there about what to do and how to make these decisions. What's the cord you can pull if you work in a company and you're working on code and you're about to ship and you kind of say, wait a second, this could be a problem. Are you able to stop the production line? Are you not? We need to kind of think about how cultures need to be overhauled perhaps. Last but not least, because I'm out of time, behaviors. This is what you do day in and day out when you come to work. What do? Well, one thing you're doing is you're utilizing data resourcefully. The data's there. You're actively looking for it and finding it. You're the person that's saying, I need to put this to good use. And there's a decision that's coming up, but we haven't brought the data to the meeting, and we need to do that. Continuously improving data. So, is it done? No, data is never done. It's never good enough. I sound like that's how I felt when I was in high school. No, it's like, we're always continually improving data, making it better and better. It's always deficient in some way, shape, or form. And so we need to have those individuals in our workplaces that say, here's what we can do to take data to a whole different level. Here's what we can do to augment it and improve upon it. And this isn't just at work, by the way, right? We're talking about this in terms of like our own personal data. How can we track our situation better and know more about ourselves and our patterns? I'm currently at a heart rate of 98. That's not bad. All right, public data. So data.world does this great. Tableau Public did this well too, putting those informational and helpful data sets out there for citizens to be able to understand their communities, their society, the public, the nations we live in, and what's working well, what's broken. And then, of course, the proprietary side of things. I think we overweight. I honestly do. And that's maybe because I had the 5-year Tableau public role. But I think we kind of think about it as like, oh, I'm going to do my job and help a company get to be an even bigger company. Okay, that's great. But I mean, come on, that's not all this is for. Your data skills, that's not all it's for. You can do a lot of good with it. Causes you champion. Issues you become aware of that you're able to communicate and socialize with your own personal networks, right? Even teams you cheer for, I don't know, you can have fun with it too, right? Heaven forbid. So there are always ways to continually improve it. 2 more to go, and then I'm out of here, right? Effectively advocating for data. This is the person saying, we should not make this decision on gut alone until we maybe take a look at some data and be able to figure out how it can be brought to bear. So advocating. Are you the person saying, I think data should be part of this conversation here? That's something that I would like to be working with those who think about that and who are also aware of the fact that data isn't the only thing. Our instinct matters a lot, and our experience matters a lot as well. Data is just another part of that overall equation. So let's not overvalue data, but at the same time, let's not leave it out. And then last but not least, since I see it as a language, the more you're around people that speak it well, the more you learn to speak it well. Right? So this then is the ultimate number 17 output, that if you do 1 through 16, the result is other people around you tend to become more data literate too. You're spreading it by your own use of it. And so I think you can take a look now in the ebook you're going to get. There's a little checklist for you to go through the 17. And I would just say, what I try to do is always ask myself, maybe only 1 or 2, 17 is a big list, right? So maybe if I just go through these categories, pick 1 or 2. What are the ones that are most important in my current role, where I am right now? And then how am I doing on those? What are my strengths? What are my areas for opportunity? So a simple little checklist to help you take this big old list of 17 here and take that down to a manageable kind of to-do list for yourself to grow in your own data literacy. And then also, again, feel free to send that around to anybody. It's a PDF. It should be in your email inbox, I think, right? Okay, I'm over time, so thank you for that and for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations as well. Thanks.